amazing, unbelievable. Yeah, you can get unbelievable stuff.
I think it is also very pretty.
Oh, it's beautiful. Morocco is there? It's so gorgeous. Like if you go in a safety frame, it's like purple, orange, pink, white, and it's on mount. Like the way they made Connecticut is by cutting mountains. So it's all like mountains in the
It's
mountain.
recording
Yeah,
or
it's
it's live.
yeah.
So
You,
You said you were in
you
Connecticut.
get stuff like that for 200.
Yeah.
Wow, brand new.
really, it's
Four
old as well,
bedroom,
right? Four bedroom.
four
Or
bedroom,
no,
two bath, two car garage.
oh, it's not now. It's up. Oh wow.
That's like as big as a house.
You can get this 20 minutes,
No way.
20 minutes north of Little Rock.
It's like 4 bedrooms. Oh my god.
Four bedroom, two bath.
Okay,
This is
it's going.
Texas.
Oh, well, 10 times. And the kicker is the taxes are $1,000
Wow.
for a year. My house here, I pay 4,000 for insurance. My house, my house is paid off, but I'm still strapped. I mean, I'm paying like my mother-in-law bought her
It's a
house
huge almost.
10 years ago. She's paying 10,000 taxes. I'm not trying to support the state.
Yeah.
It's not my job. So someone else can do it. But that's $1,000.
Okay.
Alright, this is my audio. Alright.
And they're already
Inshallah, we'll start then. We're gonna start inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم علمني ما ينفعني ونفعني في علمي. Oh Allah, please grant me knowledge that benefits me and give me benefit in the knowledge that I already have. Inshallah. So, we're starting a little bit late. So the original plan was to talk about some of the lesser known Sahaba or companions of the Prophet ﷺ, as well as some of the Imams, but mostly focusing on the Prophet ﷺ. We'll talk about just briefly the concept of I guess Sahaba at this point, and then we'll talk about some of the timeline and the geography. And after that, we'll go over the geography and the timeline every time we talk about them. But this way, we can refer to different moments in Islamic history or big moments in Islamic history when we talk about these Sahaba, inshallah. So Sahaba, Ashab, our Sunni brothers have this as a big concept. For us, it's also a big concept. And Sahaba just needs to be along with somebody. It needs to be, when we say companion, the Sahib in Arabic sense, even the Quranic sense, is to be along with something, right? Ashab al-Kahf, the people that were, amongst the cave, or Ashab al-Sabt, right? The people that were of the Sardi, which were actually cursed people, right? فقال صاحبه وهو يحاوره أنا أكثر منك مالا وأعز نفرا. When the two people are talking, the person of the garden, so right, the guy that was proud of his own wealth, right? His sahib talked to him and told him, I have more wealth than you. And they were both ashab, right? So the connotation of sahaba doesn't really have, Quranically, does not have positive or negative in general, right? And even there's even hadith on the Rasul where ashabi versus ahbabi, right? And there's different ranks. But in any case, it's a good topic that we can look into separately. But the reason we should focus on it is because we'll learn a lot from Sahaba, because there's interesting stories to all of them. And also, I think it kind of pieces more of the history of what was going on around the Prophet ﷺ and Imam ﷺ and the other Imams ﷺ in that historical moment. Because sometimes, especially as Shias or people that claim to be Shias, when we think of history, we only kind of see just Ahlul Bayt ﷺ, and then and there's no one else going on around them. And actually, there were many supporters of them, or many people that had different kind of reactions to what was going on to them. And many people actually suffered because of their love to them, as well as because of speaking out for them, actually. beyond just the people that didn't speak out or beyond the people that fought against them. We could talk about those separately, but people that actually reacted to what was happening to them. But from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam until all the events on the step. The other reason we talk about Sahaba is it also gives us a different perspective of the current worldview of what is your position in life, right? With what the truth is, right? Every Sahabi had a different, moment. Every Sahabi had a different action or reaction to what was happening. So it shows you the wide difference in what people did, and it gives you an appreciation of what real life is. Right? It's not always all black and it's not always all white. And some people are black in the beginning and black referring to one set of actions and white to another set of actions. There's no negative or positive connotation here. It's just so some people are on one depending on their motives, depending on their mood, depending on the influences they have, depending on their relations. Sometimes relations are a big thing too, and we'll talk about that too, inshallah. Some of the Sahaba, we'll talk about their family trees, especially the ones that actually relate to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because many of these people are actually also somehow related, to the Prophets sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well as imams, or to some of the other more prominent Sahaba. So in terms of the timeline, let's talk about the timeline and geography, and I'll do that. So next week we'll talk about one of the first Sahaba. We'll go from there. If you guys feel you are interested in any other Sahaba that are lesser known, please message me and we'll try to give them the recognition. So 53 before the Hijrah. Right, so we'll use the Hijri dates, and we'll kind of use this timeline because I think we'll focus on this era for now, related to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then maybe a little bit on Ali alayhi salam. So 53 before the Hijrah was the birth of the Prophet around that time. I calculated it. If I'm wrong, correct me. And then 13 before the Hijrah was the revelation, in which he spent 13 years in Mecca. And then 0 is Hijrah itself, which is the migration from Mecca to Medina. And then Badr happened at 2, Uhud happened at 3 after Hijrah. Eventually the Meccan conquest at 8 Hijrah after Hijrah. And then 3 years later, the Prophet ﷺ was martyred. At 10 Hijrah, the year before that was the final Hajj, or the first and final Hajj for the Rasul ﷺ. And then we have the first 3 caliphs in this period, and then eventually Imam Ali gets the actual rulership at 37 after Hijrah. 4 years later, he was martyred, and then 20 years later, we get to cover that. We know what happened to cover that. Any questions about the timeline or anything? Comments about the timeline? All right. And then in terms of geography, I guess we can ask questions. What's this right here? I know my drawing is really, really good, but ignore how good my drawing is. Try to play with me here. What area do you guys think this is? This is, if I call this the Mediterranean, there. If I call this the Red Sea, and this is the Arabian or Persian Sea, depending on who you ask, I guess. Arabian Sea. All right. So what do you guys think this is? Egypt. All right. Good job. So and yeah. So I don't think Cairo was there back then, because I think we talked about Cairo being established by someone else later on. I think we talked about that. Yeah, I think it was established by yeah, exactly. But it's not in the prophet. It's Alexandria, right? Alexandria and probably. Yeah. And then what's this right here? It's a little triangle. Palestine would be right here. Palestine would be right here.
Oh, this is Sinai.
Sinai Peninsula. Sinai. And then what's this 2 lines? Which was which? Oh, this is I think the Euphrates is east. Anyone disagree? No? Not wrong? Wrong? Am I gonna get hit up? I think it is. And then, so there's no Baghdad back then, because Baghdad was established later on. There's Kufa, kind of here, currently close to Najaf. Currently Najaf, Kufa is right here. And then, what would you think is here? Kind of, what was it? Exactly, Basra, which is actually a big thing that we'll talk about later on in the history. Because it was a big point. Basra, Kufa. And then what's over here? Hijaz, yes, but there's like two cities over here, one north of the other. Which one's which do you think?
I think probably
The bottom one is. Okay. Yeah, sure. It's good. Yeah, right. And what's over here? Or at least this, all of this is. And then if you actually think about it, Mecca, you go to Kaaba, right? You Kaaba, right? Rukn al-Yamani, right? Rukn al-Yamani, Rukn al-Shami, right? To Levantine or Sham, yeah, right? You go to Kaaba here, right? Right? And then Rukn al-Taraqi, and then here's the Pakistan. All right. So that's it for now, for at least not my section. So we'll continue with Dr. Ali Musa Jafar. We'll talk about existentialism. So next week we'll talk about Uthman ibn Hanif, one of the companions of the Prophet and to invite him, Ali Musa, صلى على محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
No, man, you did a lot of work. I can see that in that work. Yeah, I think the great mind. No. Right. Oh. So I'm trying to think so a lot of so really quick, I don't want to take much of your time. Just maybe for like 5 minutes. Has anyone ever heard of this term? Maybe someone that went to high school here might have heard about it. Yeah. Did you study it in high school a little bit?
I had psychology and we talked about this existentialism.
Kind of in your own words, like what does it mean to you?
Oh, it's hard to remember, but I think it's about
I think even this part, existential.
Yeah.
Existent.
like existing, literally just existence itself.
Yeah. Basically, like what it, the key tenets is the world is absurd. It's one of the things that existentialists believe. The world is absurd. Absurd. And you create your own meaning. You create meaning. Like through basically making conscious decisions. So why we're talking about it is because this is actually a world. Like you can actually base your whole life around this concept. The two main people that actually sort of founded it are Andy, one of them, and then Stark. And both of you are actually French, sort of, I guess you'd call them like writers or I guess prominent figures of their age. And they both are actually in the 20th century. So it was actually around the time of World War I. These people was born in like 1905, another one in 1913. So around the time of World War I, there was so much confusion, like so many people were dying. There was so much like war between different countries that really this sort of concept that the world is absurd started coming about. Like all this death, all of this like destruction. So these two people really champion this sort of idea that the world is absurd and you basically create your own meaning in terms of how you live. So actually, I think reflecting on the sort of society we live in today, whether it's like Russia, America, a lot of people have subliminally prescribed like kind of believed in this sort of worldview. Because what it basically entails is you do what you want. Like if you guys heard of the concept of you do you, right? So
or they say YOLO, like you only live once, right? Because basically what this worldview does is it places prime importance on the fact that you exist. The only truth really is that you're there. Like you exist in this world, and you basically need to maximize whatever you feel is valuable. So value, like we talked about value with Omar Char a few weeks ago. There's an Islamic concept of value, which is what God values, but this worldview says that whatever you value is what you should do. So whatever you think makes sense to you, whatever floats your boat is what you can do. Because basically, what these people believe is that you basically came from nothing, like you came from matter, which is basically because it's an atheistic worldview. So they believe you came from matter. You didn't come from God, and you're actually going to go back into matter. So you're going to go back into the ground, and there's no afterlife. So that's what existentialists believe. So the fact that you're actually alive is actually absurd in and of itself, because it doesn't even make sense. If you came from matter, you're going into matter. How are you even thinking? Like how are you even conscious? They don't have the answer to this question. So what they basically say is that the world is absurd. Like we can't make sense of it, and you really just should do whatever you want. So it's a very I guess convenient worldview to have, because you basically don't have to put any effort into thinking about where you came from, where you're going, because it's all non-living matter, and you're going to become that anyway. So it's actually very pessimistic, and actually I think it explains why a lot of people are depressed too, because if you subliminally believe in this, you basically are not going to be happy. Like regardless of what you do, regardless of whatever stuff that you feel that you enjoy, that sort of pessimistic idea that you're going to go into nothing and you came from nothing and the world is absurd, it's really just a very like very dreary kind of existence to have. So it's just something to keep in mind, that a lot of literature you might read, a lot of even movies you might watch, they might, like the people who wrote it might subliminally believe this. So you might have to be careful, sort of in terms of phrases that you're saying. Like even like for example, I might have said this like subconsciously sometimes to myself, but it just you got to keep you got to filter out sort of other worldviews, because we want to have an Islamic worldview. So it's important to recognize other worldviews, so that way you know what to avoid. And even the fact that you're conscious about it can really go a long way of saying like, this is not me, or I don't believe this. If that makes sense. Go ahead.
Why do they use the word absurd? Why can't they say inherent meaning? Like the word
Yeah. So
lacks inherent meaning.
So what they mean by absurd is really like human existence. You can't make sense of it, because what they say is like matter. I can understand. Like I can use physics. I can use mathematics. I can use equations to understand matter. But humans, you can't use equations on them. Like they act in very illogical ways. So what they say is, because these people lived through crazy world wars, like World War One, World War Two, where like millions of people were dying for things that really didn't make sense. So these people that espoused this worldview just couldn't make sense of the world, and they were under a lot of, I guess, stress of that time. I think France was also really battered by the war. Like I don't think France did well in either World War. So maybe these people were both French. So maybe they lived through that. Actually, like Camus, in the podcast I was listening to, the thing, he actually at the end of his life, he was actually thinking of getting baptized, and he actually wanted to become a Christian, but then he got into a car accident and died before he could actually like convert to Christianity. So maybe that could be just like God's vengeance on him, that he wasn't able to really subscribe to a worldview that was theistic before he
Maybe he
died.
died in Sevilla. Who knows?
I mean, I don't know. Like I think a lot of death can be attributed to him, because I think a lot of people that believe in existentialism, like he was one of the champions of it, and it's caused a lot of grief for a lot of people. But either way, like he actually didn't have a good ending either, unfortunately. Yeah. But yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. Any other comments or questions? Yeah.
Is predestination something they believe in? Does
Absolutely
this
not.
enter into
No.
predestination?
Absolutely not. So there is something called naturalism, where naturalists believe that sort of nature, there is some sort of force that sort of guides humankind. But these people do not believe in naturalism. They're more atheistic. So they believe that there's only matter. So there's only equations, there's only physics, but they can't explain how humans came about from that. But they say that we can't really explain it, but we exist. And they actually believe that we're the only conscious beings. Like everything else, it sort of doesn't have any like sort of like degree of introspection that humans do. So they can't really make sense of it. Yeah. Go ahead.
Weird logical jumps. Like, the same way that we get blamed for just saying that God exists, or
Mhm.
consciousness in the universe that they're saying that there isn't. We're the only ones that have it. And they're also assuming
Yeah.
that we'll never figure out who we are.
Right. And they say it's very personal. Like you have to discover who you are, and whatever you feel you are is your truth. Like everyone's truth is to themselves. So it's convenient in a way because it appeals to your ego, because it's like I can do whatever I want, and whatever I do is actually right. So they believe that if you choose to do something, then it actually makes it true. Like truth comes from you doing what you value. So it's dangerous in a way because there's no morality in it either. Like you can do something evil, and just because you want to do it or because you choose to do it, it's not really evil, you know. So it can be like you can justify your actions in a way. Yeah.
But the next question is, how do they resolve accountability? Like, how does
Hmm.
this, play with accountability or the existence of laws or nations or rules, right? Because
Yeah, they would actually ridicule all of that. Like they don't give any importance. They would say if humans like as a group agree on something, then well and good, because each human will feel happy doing what, because they'll fit in with the group, you know. But they say like kind of like if you're a lone wolf, like there's nothing stopping you from doing anything, because there's no other humans to judge you,
so
you know.
here's my next question:
Yeah.
why is there even accountability? They should do they
like
need
like like
accountability?
basically humans are only accountable to other humans if they're living with them. If a human is on his own, or if he can do something without other humans finding out, there's nothing wrong with the human doing whatever he wants, basically. But actually what they play on is actually a human actually starts to value other humans' judgment. So then it'll become your individual preference to do what other humans value. So because we're all social creatures, so they could in a way justify sort of like kind of like laws in a society, because they would say like a human doesn't want to feel that they're hurting other humans, because that could affect their own internal value of themselves. Like it could make them start thinking worse of
If there's a
themselves, you
human
know.
that values hurting others, why
That's
can't you
true.
allow him to value? Why can't you allow him to have his own values?
Yeah, that's true. Like for example, like a sociopath, or like a serial killer, for example, who's just pathologically like sort of evil. I think they would have trouble reconciling that. Like they would say actually that person themselves, whatever they value, they wouldn't be able to critique it, because like their worldview means that whatever a human decides to do consciously, they can't say that they're
Yeah,
wrong. Yeah.
that's the
So
meaning. That's the truth.
yeah. So they would have a lot of trouble critiquing like a serial killer, for example.
Or even laws. I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds like they can't even like justify laws.
Yeah, yeah. It's basically like if humans mutually agree on a law, they have no problem with it. But there's nothing in the law itself that makes it objectively true or not. It's really just the human that agrees to do it. Yeah. So yeah, but I think a lot of people think this way, even though it sounds really cynical. I think when you actually think about it realistically, a lot of like secular, like it's a very popular secular philosophy to have, like extremely popular. Like if you go to high school here, you're going to learn about it.
I've seen
A lot of people
people,
subscribe to it.
especially my professor.
Yeah.
He liked it. He
Yeah.
was in the he was in the idea that if you are alone and like you need like alone time, basically saying, and when you find like the right thing that makes you happy, then like that's the reason.
That's what you should do.
That's what you should
Yeah.
do.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So especially if you have any kids, like any of us that are going to public school, make sure you educate them that this is not Islamic, and you have to really like hit it home that they shouldn't subscribe to this kind of worldview, because it can be really damaging.
Here's my next
Yeah.
question. It's the value. He's saying whatever makes you happy. Is happiness the value then? Is it
Well, that's how they define it, but it's really what they want to do, what they desire.
Yeah, I think the way I saw it in the literature is if a human consciously chooses to do something, it's like choice. If you like make a decision to do something, that's what existentialists value. It's that human like
It's the
freedom
fact
of thought, or that freedom of expression. Like if a human expresses their sort of internal like beliefs, yeah, that's what they value. Like choosing to do something is what I was reading. Yeah. Did you have anything to add, listen to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that so, Camus wrote this book, The Stranger, right?
Right.
That's one of his classic works. And I think there's a very interesting, if you look at the end of that book, I think that there's like an interesting discussion between the protagonist of the novel and a priest, right? And it's almost like the style of Camus is almost like a stream of consciousness almost, but he's telling it to you, he's telling the story to you from the perspective of the protagonist. But basically the priest is coming to the protagonist and telling him that why don't you accept Jesus? Why don't you accept the truth? And it's very interesting because Camus like basically he is projecting his feelings through the protagonist, but he was like one of the things that really stood out was uh, from that whole discussion was how can this priest be so confident in truth? How can he be so certain? This certainty that he has, it's absurd. It's meaningless. You know, it's this almost attack on any type of you know other worldview that claims that
They have answers or anything.
they
Yeah.
have answer.
Right.
They completely refute the whole idea of having any type of meaning.
Right.
So any type of belief structure or philosophy that claims that there's a meaning or a value to life, they try to undermine it.
Right.
And they say, oh well, nothing makes sense.
Yeah.
Everything. Even I think he wrote this book about a guy becoming a cockroach. I forget what was the name of that book.
Yeah. Metamorphosis. Yeah.
Metamorphosis.
But I think wasn't that Kafka? I think that was
Oh, that
Kafka.
was Francis Kafka.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's another existentialist.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Right.
these guys, but they would frame. You know, I think one key thing to point out though, what you're saying is that this isn't a new philosophy.
Oh,
This
right.
existed even at the time of the Prophet, right? Like this is mentioned in the Quran, right? وقالوا إن هي إلا حياتنا الدنيا نموت ونحيا وما يهلكنا إلا الدهر. Right? These people who were called Dahiyya, they said, you know, that nothing like there's nothing but this worldly life, right? We die and we live, and nothing destroys us except time, right?
Right.
You know, so
Yeah.
Allah already mentions these people. أفرأيت من اتخذ إلهه هواه, right?
Yeah.
Have you not looked
Exactly.
at the person who takes his own desire as his God, right?
Yeah.
So that's already mentioned in the Quran. This philosophy is just a Western iteration of the same
Yes.
themes
Exactly. Yeah.
that existed
It's
in
true.
the Arabian society. That paganistic philosophy had the same idea that you know, it's nothing but the vicissitudes of time that make a difference in whether we live or die, and you just have to make the most of your experiences, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that philosophy Allah has already critiqued in the Quran. أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَنَّمَا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ عَبَثًا. Do you really think we just created you like in vain for nothing? You know,
Mhm.
this is like what these guys believe, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
Actually, he uses abatha as absurdity. Like
Yeah. 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 That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But I think that's a good area to end. If you want to come up and inshallah. صلى على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. Yeah.
Yeah, continue. Okay, inshallah. I'll try to keep it brief. I actually just want to summarize a lot of the things I talked about already and maybe
Expand on a couple points, inshallah. Oh, I think I unplugged it. Sorry. Oh, wait a second. I think that's it.
Yeah, one fun thing as he's setting up that I was talking about, like I listened to like an hour sort of lecture on it. It just kind of like made my mood go sour for the rest of the day. So I probably just try not to read too much about it because it just like ruins your mood.
I was gonna add, you know,
Yeah.
why are we stopping suicide then?
Yeah.
Why
No,
are we
but
stopping
just
people
like
killing each other?
like sort of reading
the
about
point?
it just kind of
It's
makes your
horrible.
mood go down. So just,
It's horrible.
yeah, I would just like not even read about
We're
it.
not designed like that.
Right.
Even in every conscious thing that you do in your life, that is not how you think.
Yeah.
There's always purpose. There's always reason, and there's always something that follows another. But for some reason, this is accepted.
Yeah.
As the big picture, which just doesn't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's horrible.
Okay, inshallah. Inshallah, please recite aloud salawat and we'll get started. صل على محمد وآل محمد. Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, inshallah. So, you know, what we've been doing for the past several weeks, there's been a little of a hiatus. Last week we went to Dave's Hot Chicken. It was very good, mashallah, Brother Abdullah. Thank you for arranging that. But we had been discussing this book by Sheikh Misbah Yazdi, rahimahullah. He passed away about 2 years ago, but he is a great philosopher of Iran who has written this book, Theological Instructions, right? الدروس في العقيدة الإسلامية, or آموزش‌های إسلامی, that in Persian. He originally wrote it in Persian. It got translated into Arabic and then into English. So this book is very good because it summarizes the basic core aqidah of the Shia in general, but also just as a Muslim, like how should you think about God, right? And then sort of it builds on your aqidah, builds on your belief structure. How should their worldview be based? And one of the things you'll find about Islam, like we had talked about, is that it's very logical. It's a very logical belief system, and it builds on the basis of logic. A lot of other religions, you won't find this logical connection. A lot of times it's very haphazard, and it's like, well, this is what we believe, this is what our book says. But the approach that Sheikh Misbah adopts here is trying to first recognize that the core of your epistemology should be your aql, right? Rationality. Before you go to a book, before you start looking at the Quran, or, okay, the Quran, I'm just going to accept it now, my whole belief structure is based on the Quran. Rather, no, look at your rationale, use your rationality as a tool to judge the scripture first and decide what is truth, what is not. So that's the way that us Muslims, that's the way we look at this paradigm, right? You have to start with your own rationality. That's your core epistemology. Epistemology meaning, how do you know what you know, right? The way that we know what we know is we use our rationality. That's the way that all us human beings, the way we interact with each other, the way we learn things from one another is through rationality. Rationality dictates the way that humans behave, right? So why not use that same principle when it comes to your religion, right? Establishing your religious identity, establishing your religious worldview. Use your rationality, but you will find that, when you base things on rationality, a lot of religion actually starts to come together. A lot of your beliefs you can actually derive from using sound, logical, and rational principles, right? So this is what Sheikh Misbah endeavors to do in this book. Rather than starting from the premise that, oh, what the Quran says is right, and let's go into the Quran and take this verse and that verse about, Tawheed, and these verses about Nubuwah, and just put them all together. That's not the way you build your actual knowledge base, right? The way you build your knowledge base is by starting with rationality, understanding things from a rational perspective, and then finding out which religious scripture best conforms to the dictates of rationality, right? And you'll find Islam is the perfect religious worldview that correlates with, a rational understanding of God, right? So a rational understanding of the way the world works, right? So we had been going through specifically, I think in his book, you'll find this book on alislam.org. For those of you who are recently joining, this book, it's alislam.org, but it's called Theological Instructions, the way it's been translated. And we're going through chapters, I think 7 through 10 right now, in particular. And this section has been focused on the arguments for God's existence, right? And one of the key arguments that Sheikh Misbah had discussed was the argument from contingency, right? Argument from contingency. Can someone summarize that for me? We talked about this multiple times. Argument from contingency. Does anybody remember? Can summarize it?
Everything depends on an independent existence.
Okay, yeah, that's a great way to put it. But there's certain, if we're gonna expand that out a little bit more, Brother Muhammad, do you remember? Argument from contingency? It's been a while, so it's been a minute, so that's why I wanted to review it really quick.
Is it related to everything has I wouldn't say cause and effect, but some sort of like that. Some of this, something like that.
Yeah. Okay. That's okay. That's okay. Ali Musa, can you explain?
Yeah, so everything is, as we could say, it's possible that it could exist or not exist, which means that it's contingent. So like we could imagine a scenario where that person or that being or that piece of matter might not have come into existence.
Yeah.
So that's what we mean by contingent.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to just expand it a little bit, okay? So just three things, three terms I'm going to write in Arabic, okay? Because I think this is really important to understand correctly. Okay. So we have these three terms, mumkin, wajib, and mumtana, right? So what Sheikh Misbah says is he's trying to establish an argument for the existence of what we call the necessary existent, right? So mumkin means something which is possible to exist or possible not to exist. This is what we call contingent, right? So contingent, right? And then remember we said wajib is necessary, right? It's the word necessary. And mumtana means impossible, right? So what Sheikh Misbah says is that, look, anything you can conceive of, anything at all, falls into one of these three categories. Either it exists contingently, meaning it's possible that it exists, it's possible it doesn't exist, right? Or it's necessary, meaning it has to exist. There's no state that you can imagine where it wouldn't exist, right? Or it's impossible, meaning it just cannot exist, right? It's not possible, right? So for instance, a square circle, it's impossible. It couldn't be, right? So that's an example of something that's impossible, that's self-contradictory, right? So everything you can possibly imagine or even conceive of falls into one of these three categories, right? So what he was saying is, look, everything in existence, being that it falls into one of these three categories, we have to try to understand, is it necessary? Do we have to have something that's a necessary existent, or could everything potentially just be contingent? That it could exist, it could not exist, right? So contingent. The other meaning of contingent is that in order for something to exist, the right circumstances, the right conditions need to surround it to make it actualize, right? So that's what contingent means. If you have the right circumstances, the right conditions surrounding a certain phenomenon, then it will actualize. So that's what we call contingent existence. So you can think about it like an on-off switch. I think I used this example, right? So on, off, right? So a contingent thing can be in the on position or the off position, right? Whereas a necessary thing is locked in the on position only, right? And an impossible is locked in the off position only, right? Okay, why is this important? Because what Sheikh Misbah is doing is he's saying, look, everything can exist. Let's say, the way that materialists think about the world, they say everything in this universe, it either could exist or it couldn't exist, right? There's a possibility that it exists or it doesn't exist. If the right circumstances surround it, it'll come into materialization, right? So that's what we call contingent existence, right? Necessary existence, it's always on. There's no, it's what we call a non-contingent existence. It doesn't require any conditions. It just always is, right? It's always in the on position. And then impossible, of course, doesn't exist. So everything in our universe falls into one of these two categories, right? Because impossible, obviously, we cross this out because if something's impossible, it won't be, right? It's not a thing, right? So either we have a scenario where everything in this universe is contingent, right? Everything in this universe is mumkin, right? Or we have a mix of things that are possible and things that are necessary, right? So what Sheikh Misbah does is he says, look, if everything in the universe could be in either the on or off position, right? By default, everything is in the off position. It only turns on if it's the right circumstances, the right conditions actualize it, right? So by default, though, everything's going to be in the off position. So if everything were in the off position, nothing would materialize, right? So imagine, like we said, I think we gave some examples. If everybody's standing lined up they're about to race, and every person standing there says, look, I'm not going to take the first step. I'm not going to get a head start unless the person next to me moves, right? So they're making their movement contingent upon the next person, right? So if every person did that, the race would never start, right? So that's what Sheikh Misbah is saying, that everything in this universe, if everything was in the off position, meaning that everything was contingent, it needs the right circumstances to materialize it, then this universe wouldn't ever exist, right? The fact that this universe exists means that there must be something that started this all, that is forced in the on position, that made other things go into the on position, right? So a necessary existence has to be, right? Because then everything would remain in the off position, right? It's like if somebody says, I'll give you another example. You have a room of people with their guns, right? And they're about to start shooting each other.
I like the food one better. The one paying for the food, but I think that one is a nice one.
Oh, paying for the food? Okay, so yeah, like for instance, you have a meal, right, with your friends. You go out. Let's say we all go out. We all go out to a meal, right? A Dave's Hot Chicken, and we say, oh, okay, unless person X, takes out his wallet, I'm not going to take out my wallet. The food's never going to get paid for, right? If everybody said, hey, I'm not going to take my wallet out unless the next person takes out his wallet, the food would just, you would eat your food and you just sit there until eternity, right? Somebody has to take the initiative and say, look, I don't care what other people are doing. I'm going to pull out my wallet and pay this bill, right? So that's similar to what Sheikh Misbah is saying here, right? He's saying that you need a non-contingent existence to start this process, right? Yes, Brother Muhammad?
I don't remember if we talked about it before, but is it related to like the unmover?
Yeah, the first mover, right?
First mover.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. Tied into this concept, the first mover. You have to have someone who initiates this whole process, right? This initiates this chain of existence. If everything was contingent, then everything by default is in the off position because it's waiting on other things to materialize to make it actualize, right? So, that's the thing about, for instance, even time, matter, and space. So this is a very common argument that people say, right? Say, oh, this universe was materialist. They will say, hey, matter, time, and space, these are the things that have always been and always will be, right? But matter, time, and space, there are situations where matter ceases to exist, right? It's dependent on time and space, right? Time and space make matter exist, right? If time is not present, space is not present, matter won't be, right? So there's an interdependency there. They're all linked to each other. They're all waiting on the other one to materialize so that they can exist. So as a result, time, matter, and space cannot be the necessary existent, right? They're by definition, they're contingent existences, right? Because they depend on other factors to materialize. So the necessary being is something which doesn't require anything to force it to exist or make it come into existence. It just is. It always is, right? And that's God. That's the theistic definition, the very broad theistic definition of God. That God is the first mover. He's the non-contingent existence. He doesn't need anything to materialize to make him exist. He just is. He's in the default on position, right? Does that make sense? You guys have questions about that? So now somebody could say, well, okay, contingent, necessary. Well, how do you get this idea of tawheed from this, right? So they say, okay, we can have multiple necessary existences. Maybe there's two gods, right? And they're both necessary existences. They have to exist. Then the question comes, okay, well, what's the relationship between these two, right? What's the relationship between one necessary existent and the other necessary existent? Is there any link between them? Existentially, ontologically, what's that link between the two, right? And so then when that question gets superimposed and you say, okay, well, each one is independent. If you said each one is independent of the other, right? If you said each one of these gods is independent of the other, then they don't actually have any type of ontological relationship. There's no link between them, right? But if they're both existing simultaneously, there has to be a link. There has to be a connection. So by this, you are able to prove that there has to only be one. There only has to be one necessary existent. There cannot be two, right? Because by the fact that there's a relationship between these two, if they're on the exact same ontological plane, there has to be a link between the two of some type of dependence or connection, right? So by that fact, you can only have one in that ontological plane, that highest ontological plane. I guess it's a little bit abstract, but we'll get into this a little bit more in detail.
The realm of existence.
Yeah.
You're talking about the realm of existence. If they're independent in their existences, then you're talking about two realms of existence.
Yeah.
They're independent, right?
Yeah.
If they're both in the same realm of existence,
they cannot truly be independent
there
of
must
each
be
other.
something going on.
There must be a link. Yeah, and I think the Quran beautifully summarizes this. There's a verse, لَوْ كَانَ فِيهِمَا آلِهَةٌ إِلَّا اللَّهُ لَفَسَدَتَا. If there was any other God, right, than Allah in the heavens and the earth, they would have been completely destroyed. They would have been completely rendered, basically completely chaotic, right? Because that's God. God has to be only one, right? There has to only be one God. There has to only be one necessary existent. Otherwise, this whole paradigm of contingency necessity falls apart. So this is the first element that we note in this argument. So the necessary existent, right? There has to be one necessary existent. So one necessary existent. And what's the characteristic of this necessary existent? The characteristics are that basically everything is dependent upon him and he is not dependent on anything, right? So those are the two characteristics. Everything is dependent on him. Everything in existence, all contingency is dependent upon him, and he is not dependent upon anything, right? So once you have these two principles, you can start deriving certain things. Okay, because we said necessary existence, that's very broad, right? So then how do you get to the other characteristics of the Abrahamic God that we believe in, right? So this is how you do it. So the two characteristics, I'm just going to write them down, right? Independent of all, everything dependent on it, right? Okay. So from this, we start to understand certain attributes of the existent, of the necessary existent, right? One of the key attributes, I'm just going to write it over here. So if he's independent of all, he has to be independent of time, space, and matter, right? Because those things are, as we said, contingent existences, right? They require each other. There's an interrelationship. Each one of them is interdependent, right, on the other. So God has to be independent of all, right? This is what we get into what we call negative attributes, meaning that God cannot be limited in time. He cannot be limited in space. He cannot be limited in matter, right? So meaning that right, he's non-temporal, non-corporeal, right? And he's non-dimensional, right? So God has to be non-temporal, non-corporeal, non-dimensional, right? So why? Because if God was limited by time, or if he was existing in time, right, then he has a relationship. His existence depends on time. So he fails to be the necessary existent. He's contingent. His existence is contingent upon the existence of time, right? So same thing with corporeality. This idea of anthropomorphism, that God has hands or legs, right? This also falls apart, right? Because then God becomes dependent on matter, right? So that's one of the big arguments, right? So that completely is something we have to keep in mind, that God cannot be corporeal. The other key aspect of this is that if God had hands and legs and a body, each one of those parts are interdependent upon the other, right? So for instance, if God had hands and legs, and you cut off one of his arms, right? You've now made God weaker, right? You've now taken something away from the existence of God, right? God, in order to be whole, he's dependent on all these different parts of him, right? So because of that, that again goes against this notion of being independent of all, right? He's independent of everything. So that's why God cannot be corporeal, right? He cannot have a body.
Even in abstract sense, defining him, you've also defined him. So when you defined him, now your mind has, conquered God, basically.
Yes.
Your mind should be God versus God being God.
You got it. Yeah. So there's something. It's called. I'm going to get to that point. I'm going to expand that point a little bit more. But so the other thing is non-dimensionality, right? So meaning God cannot have dimensions. He cannot have space that he takes up, right? Again, this goes back to the whole idea of corporeality to some extent. But he cannot exist in the realm of space, right? If he exists in the realms, exists in some concept of space, then he ceases to be God, right? He ceases to be independent of everything, right? So those are the three kind of negative attributes that we get. There's another very important thing we have to point out, that God is simple, right? He's not complex, right? Why do we say God must be simple? Can somebody explain? What do you guys think?
So that everyone can understand, like even with someone who's not, who can think about stuff that is abstract.
Yeah. So okay, that's to a certain extent. Okay, but why existentially does God have to be simple? He cannot be complex.
I feel like when something is complex, it's more than just itself. Like there's, like you said, there's parts to it.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing.
Right.
There's things related to it, or you can say in this sense, like things are dependent to it.
Yeah.
When something is simple, it's as simple as like it's just there. Like it's a simple thing. But when something is complex, I feel like there's more than one to it.
Yeah.
You can even argue it's more limited.
Yeah. When something's complex,
Occam's razor, it's a solution versus the solution that takes you many ways.
the more the complex, the more limited it is.
Yeah. So first you have to define what does complex mean and what does simple mean, right? Complex means that something is composed of multiple parts, right? That's what complex is, right? Whereas simple, it doesn't have any parts. It's indivisible, right? It doesn't have any separations within it, particularizations. So that's what we mean by complex. Simple is the opposite of that, right? Simple is you have no particularizations. It's pure, and it's indivisible, right? Why does God have to be like that? Because if it was possible to separate or take a part out of God, then he would cease to be God. He basically becomes a dependent being. His existence is contingent upon all of his parts being together, right? So that interdependency makes him incapable. It disqualifies him from being a necessary existent. Because in order to be on the on position, he's got to have all of his parts, right?
And they have to work.
And they have to be in working condition, right? So you guys see that? So that's why God cannot be complex.
Something has to enforce the system to actually function as well.
Yes, exactly. So that's why God has to be simple. And going back to what Abdullah was saying, about this point, is very important to understand. This is not just in a physical sense, but also in a mental way as well. Like God, you cannot compartmentalize God even from a mental standpoint. So you know how we have like the 99 names of Allah, right? And we say, okay, well, God is Rahman, He is Rahim, He is Ghafoor, He is Aziz, He has all these names, right? So do you think all these names, you can compartmentalize different aspects of God and say, okay, this part of God is wrathful, this part of God is merciful, this part of God is just. This sort of mentalization that we've done to make all these names of God, you cannot, if you actually say that all of these are parts of God, it's actually shirk, right? So it's actually a type of polytheism to say that, right? So in fact, what we say is that God's essence is all of these things simultaneously to the highest level of perfection, and it's all unified in one. There's no particularization. The particularizations that we've done, these compartmentalizations of the names, are for us human beings to understand. But God is all of these things simultaneously at once, right? So simple, right? God is simple. There's no parts, there's no divisions. You cannot even mentally divide God, right? God is pure and perfect, right? So it's very hard to understand for a human being. That's why this is perfection, right? Ontological perfection we're talking about, right? So of course, human beings, we're incapable of understanding this. This is why we have the 99 names. But this is really important to understand. Simple, we're not talking about necessarily in the sense of just corporealism, like God, like from a matter standpoint, right? But we're talking about even mentally, you cannot divide God, right? Does that make sense to you guys? Because if that were the case, then you have to ask the question, well, what's the relationship between God's justice and God's mercy, and how do they intertwine? What's their connection? There's an interdependency there, and it makes the whole sort of existence of God fall apart. Right?
Transience and change.
Yes.
And temporal.
Exactly.
So you're saying there's perfect. So God's simplicity is like him being perfect, his perfection. And then if one were to say, like God is complex, they're giving him characteristics, like how you said, like the 99 names, and like actually giving him like saying that he is this.
Yeah.
He is Ar-Rahman. He is like characterizing.
Right.
So that's what like saying something is complex.
Yes. So complex would say the meaning of complex is that there are multiple parts or compartmentalizations, particularizations to God, right? That's what complex means. Complex means that there are multiple little parts to something, right? That go into it. God cannot be like that. If God were like that, then he fails to be God. Because he needs all his parts to exist in order for him to be, right? So that goes against being necessary. He's not in the on position all the time. He needs his parts to make him go into the on position, right? You guys get it? Does that make sense? Okay, so there's a condition to God's existence, which is all his parts should be there. But God's existence is unconditional. It doesn't need any conditions. So because of that, he has to be simple, right? Does that make sense? So this is, again, tying into our aqidah as Muslims, right? All these things, this is what we believe about God, right? And this is how we're deriving this from this very principle of being the necessary existent. Now, there's some other attributes, but I think this is really important. These things are really important for you guys to understand. So I think I'm just going to stop here, and we'll go into. I still want to go to the attributes of essence and action. That's the next section we're really going to explore. But this is a positive attribute, right? Simple. There's one more which I'm going to just mention, right? It's God is the cause of everything, right? So he is what we call al-illatul mujida. Al-illatul mujida means he is the cause which makes everything exist, right? And so this is kind of a segue into what we're going to discuss in the next section, inshallah, but we'll stop here. But basically, in terms of if God is the source of everything, he is the ontological perfection, right? We said, or he is the thing which gives everything else existence, right? Then there's a certain rule in Arabic. It says فَاقِدُ الشَّيْء لَا يُعْطِيهِ, right? That someone who doesn't have something, he cannot give it, right? So what that means is that every type of perfection that exists in our universe, right? It has to go back to God, because God is the cause of everything that exists in this universe. So every type of perfection that exists in this world has to go back in its infinite sense to God, right? So every perfection that we have as human beings, it traces back to God, because God is the ontological, higher plane, right? So in order for us to have anything of good, it has to have come from somewhere. It has to have come from the source, right? So that's that rule. فَاقِدُ الشَّيْء لَا يُعْطِيهِ. Someone who's deficient of something cannot give it. So whatever we have of goodness has to come from God. وَمَا بِكُم مِّن نِعْمَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. Whatever type of ni'mah you have is from God, right? That's why even this principle of saying Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, all praises to God, Lord of the worlds, right? This all praise goes back to this very concept, right? That whatever perfection, whatever kamalat exists, whatever is of kamal that exists in our world, it goes to God. He is the source, the origin of it, right? So when you understand that, then a lot of other things start to become more clear, which we'll hopefully discuss next time. The attributes of essence and the attributes of action, inshallah. But we'll pause it here, inshallah, because it's getting late. Please recite aloud salawat, inshallah.
Because I've been studying a lot of different worldviews, like deism, naturalism, etc. But I noticed a major breaking point between them is they some of them believe in a God that's conscious, that basically is able to express preferences for what human beings do, or it has a say in what human beings do, versus a God that just created everything and like hands are tied, like the God just sits there and lets human beings do whatever they want. Like that sort of discrepancy between the different worldviews, sort of like an impersonal God and a personal God who's like involved in human beings' interactions and everything. So I guess to reason with that in terms of the tendency and the Kamal argument, would it be to ask, like, is a God more perfect if a God is conscious, or if a God is like just matter? Is that an easy way to say, like, a God is more perfect if a God is able to express and sort of like has consciousness? So is that a good reasoning for like logically thinking about it?
I feel like giving God like matter, or like just giving him existence, limits him, and then at that point you can't call him God, because then he is basically like one of us, and we're imperfection.
No. Like what I was saying is like all of those characteristics, like non-temporal, non-corporeal, non-dimensional, simple, cause. You can have a God that's in a sense not really alive and have all those characteristics. Like that's not actually involved in human life. Like the main, I think maybe it's the Arabic word hay, maybe like that characteristic of being like alive in a sense. Like you can have a God that's basically some sort of hyperdimensional sort of material, not like it's immaterial, but you get what I'm saying. Like it would be like just like a supreme intellect that basically is not actually involved in human affairs. Maybe I'm not asking it correctly. But
No, I understand what you're saying, but actually this is exactly what I want to talk about next time. So this idea of ontological perfection, right?
Okay.
What does that mean? What does ontological perfection mean, right? And what is defined as perfection? So Sheikh Misbah goes into three things. So he says the essential attributes of God are that he's omnipotent, omniscient, and ever living, right? Those are the three things. So whatever, I mean, when you look at our universe, right, you can say, okay, well, something which is dead, something which is alive, right? Right? Look at something which is dead, something which is alive. So, like we said, فَاقِدُ الشَّيْء لَا يُعْطِيهِ. Something which doesn't have something cannot give it, right? So if something is alive, the source needs to be alive, right? In order for us to be alive, right? The source has to be alive.
Is this a correct logical jump that we can make?
Yes.
I think that's what I was asking. Like, is that a logical?
Yeah, it's a completely logical.
I mean, exactly from the angle, like, because some would argue, some would argue the argument from deficit, right? So someone would say, okay, well, this person's short, so God must have shortness, right? Like,
Yeah, so I think we had talked about this. I think we had talked about this last time. Do you remember I talked to you guys about the fact that one of God's names is Alim, right? Al-Alim, right? Or Al-Alim, you can say the all-knowledgeable, the omniscient, right? But God's name is not Al-Aqil, right? Al-Aqil, which is somebody who has aql, right? Somebody who has the capacity to rationalize or reason. That's not one of God's names, right? You can say, well, aql is kamalul insan. The perfection of the human being is his aql, right? But this is a human mortal sort of particularization of knowledge, right? That a human being has. You see, so aql has this concept of using your mind, processing, right? God doesn't need to process. Instant, right? He knows, right? So that's complex. Yeah, aql is a characteristic of complexity, right? So, but God doesn't need. God is completely devoid of any complexity, right? So what? So
It's like limited. So like
yes,
what knowledge this world has to give is the only thing that like this
yeah,
is all that like you can observe.
yes, exactly,
So
yeah.
really like all knowledge.
So what you have to do is you have to take the attributes of perfection that exist in a human being and strip them of their dimensionality, strip them of their mortality, strip them of every type of deficiency, right? And then you can absolutify, or I guess abstractify that to God, right? So for instance, shortness. Shortness is by definition something dimensional. So it completely, I mean, that's not it cannot be a perfection, right? For instance, like we said, blindness, right? Blindness is an attribute of a corporeal being, right? That is, we completely strip that, right? So that cannot exist in God, right? Um,
So let's go deeper then, because I think this may come even later, and we may talk about this later. But choice, right? The choice to perform something not in the way of Allah, right? Because some will argue, well, where is that coming from? Is Allah the source of the deficit of shaitan, right? How did shaitan do the deficit? How did Adam do that deficit? Why are we doing deficits? What's the source of this deficit? Allah's allowing it. Allah's not allowing it. Allah's in control, right? In the end. So that eventually will come to the question, like, isn't that from Allah? So maybe we'll discuss it later.
well, I mean, that goes back to omnipotence, right? So omnipotence, it comes from the Arabic word, you can say Allah is Qadir, right? Qadir, or all powerful, right? Comes from the Arabic word qudra, right? Qudra is your like your taqa, or your capacity to do something, right? So so qudra has, of course, the human being has the capacity to do things. He has the power uh, to implement things, right? He has the power to choose. So that power, right, is a type of perfection, right? And in God, it exists to the umpteenth degree. God has absolute ikhtiyar, absolute choice, right? So he's absolutely powerful. وَهُوَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. He's over every single thing qadir, right? Powerful to do whatever he wants. So in a human being, we have a limitation because of our human nature, because of our existing in time, matter, and space. Our qudra, our capacity, our power has quyud, or basically different restrictions from different levels. We cannot do every single thing we want. Human beings can't. I mean, our free will is limited by the dimensions of time, space, and matter, by the rules of physics, right? Those limit the things that we're able to do. By genetics, all these things actually are certain things that cause us not to be able to do certain things, right?
Even like contingency,
Yeah.
In situations.
Yeah. But, at the same time, this concept of choosing righteousness or evil, right? Choosing to do good or choosing to do evil, right? Evil by definition is naqs. It's a type of deficiency, right? And of course, God, it's in God's capacity to do. Of course, if God chose, he could do injustice, but he would never do injustice. Why? Because he's a perfect being, right? Because the only reason you do injustice and you behave in a naqis way, a way that's deficient, is because you lack perfection, right? You have a deficit, right? That's the reason why you pursue evil, right? So, but God doesn't need to do. Remember, I gave you this line from Sahifa, I think. وَإِنَّمَا يَحْتَاجُ إِلَى الظُّلْمِ الضَّعِيفِ, right? The only one who goes towards oppression, the only one who behaves in an oppressive way is someone who's weak, right? How are they weak? Either they have deficiency in knowledge, right? Deficiency in power, or they have some type of self-interest that they're trying to materialize. They have some type of need, right? So the one who's weak is the one who goes towards dhulm, towards transgression, towards oppression. But God is perfect. So why would God need have anything to do with deficiency, right? So that's, again, what I'm saying is you have to abstractify that qudra that the human being has and take it to basically almost take it to its perfection in God. Yeah, it exists in God. Whatever goodness that we have in us, whatever perfection exists in the human being, you have to take it out of its mortal constraints and then take it to the highest level in God, right? And those three attributes, that God is ever living, all knowing, and all powerful, are the three main ones to remember.
To go even deeper, as you mentioned, good versus evil. The word even evil itself is just like the word muhala or muhana.
Yeah.
Evil is not really an existence. It is the lack of good or a deficit of good.
Right.
Evil basically is not itself. It's just like okay, say like black and dark.
Right.
Is dark something that actually exists in a corporeal sense, just in a physical sense? It is not. It's the lack of light that makes darkness.
Yeah.
Evil and good, and I think in the end it's just.
Like same thing what Ali Musa was asking, well, why couldn't a God exist that's mayit, that's dead, you know? Because maybe you could say being mayit is a type of perfection, right? So why don't we take that being dead as a perfection and we say, oh, well, God must be the most dead, right? Astaghfirullah, right? But somebody could argue that. So that's sophistry, though. That's just a sophist argument. You know why? Because death is the absence of life, right? Life is something. Death is nothing. Death is non-existence, right? Death, or you can say, is the lack of life, right? It's the lack of consciousness. So consciousness is something. The lack of consciousness is a deficiency, right? So you cannot impose deficiency upon God. That's why God has to be alive, right?
It's curious to go deeper into good and evil. What is good in the end, but it's the way of Allah. Truly, yes, but truly, what is good in the end? Like you strip it off of everything, like it is good not but what is prescribed by Allah.
Yeah, of course.
From we have for us, alhamdulillah, it's a little clear. But if you were to delve into what is good, what is good, eventually you have to get to a source. It tells me what is good. If you believe in goodness being absolute, you have to find the source of absolute.
Right.
You get to goodness. But inshallah, maybe we'll get to this argument later on. The capacity of, because you said whoever doesn't have something cannot give it.
Right.
So, because people will still argue, like, this person has aspersions toward evil, has aspersions towards lack of good, has aspersions toward doing stuff that's less good. So is this from God? Right? Because we're saying that, God's giving everything. So has God given them this inclination? Well, I think we can maybe talk about this eventually later when we talk about free choice.
I think because evil is the absence of good. So it's up to that person whether they want to manifest all of the goodness that Allah is giving them, or if they want to throw it all away. But Allah only gives good. It's up to that person whether they want to.
Brother Jibril, you had a question?
I was asked by a friend, how can God be infinite while not being everything?
How can God be infinite while not being everything?
As in, if God is not everything, then is he not deficient because there's existence outside of him?
Oh, yeah. So this kind of gets into what we call this concept of wahdat al-wujud, right? So this is something, a concept that exists within Islamic philosophy. Islamic existentialism, you can call it. But existentialism in the sense of understanding existence, not in the sense of denying the relevance of existence, like in Western existentialism. But so within Islam, right, we say that pretty much our existence is actually, it's truly everything is sort of a manifestation of God's basically, you can say God's knowledge, God's actions. We're a manifestation of God's actions in this world, right? All of us, like we truly don't exist. Like we don't have a true independent existence, right? So to say that I exist and God exists, from an Islamic standpoint, that's wrong. You don't really exist, right? So that's why then these concepts kind of get similar to can get very philosophical, right? But like you can find traces of this even in the Quran. Like there's a verse, "Kullu shay'in halikun illa wajha," right? Everything is perishing except God's face, except the countenance of God, right? "Kullu man 'alayha fan wa yabqa wajhu rabbika dhul jalali wal ikram," right? Everything is everything on the surface of the earth, on the surface of this, you can even say universe if you translate it in that way if you want. But everything that we can see, right, is perishing, right? It's all perishing. وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ, and the countenance of your Lord will remain, right? So مَا عِنْدَكُمْ يَنْفَدْ وَمَا عِنْدَ اللَّهِ بَاقٍ, right? Everything with you is perishing. Everything with God is persistent. It doesn't ever be destroyed. It's never destroyed, right? So what that means, in essence, some people, they say, okay, well, that means that's referring to the future. But actually, no, it's saying in this moment, كُلُّ شَيْءٍ هَالِكٌ, everything is perished, right? Everything is gone except the face of God, right? So these verses are extremely deep, and you can spend your whole life thinking about them, But what it means is that truly everything that we see, it's kind of it exists. You can think about it. It exists in the mind of God. It's almost like that concept, Of course, within our realm, we think of it as existing, right? But in reference to God, it doesn't really exist. The only thing that truly exists is the necessary existing.
If you take his question in the literal sense, it's kind of like that contradictory statement, because if you say that God is not infinite if he's not also me, then you're basically trying to limit God, because you're going to be compartmentalizing him into parts, like I'm God, you're God, he's God, but we're all different parts. So you can't compartmentalize God by saying he's infinite, but I'm going to limit him by making him compartmentalized. So it's like God can't make a rock so heavy that he can't lift it. Like that sort of like conundrum of like contradiction. Like you can't like limit God's attributes by trying to conflate one of his other attributes. Like that's limited.
Because the question you ask is, if I take myself away, is God less now?
Yeah, because you're going to be like dividing him into parts if you say that we're all God. Like God is.
That's what I told my friend.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's what you told.
This wasn't my question. This was
Oh,
his
okay.
question.
Yeah.
I think that's
That would be the
like
answer.
a Hinduism
Because he
belief that
corporealizes
everything
this.
is God,
Right.
everything has
That
God
would
in
be
it.
pantheism.
Yeah. It's a very common Hindu belief, yes.
Would this
It's called pantheism. Pantheism.
would this belief
It's not like
be related to
because
making God complex?
corporeality is not
Because
reality.
you are saying God is this, God is
Yeah,
everything.
it's like
illusory.
a words, like
It's true.
have you heard like that sort of objection, like God is not infinitely powerful if he can't make a rock that's so heavy that he can't lift it. If you say he can't do that, then he's not infinitely powerful. So it's like kind of like a play on words. You're kind of stuck if you say, oh, like he can make that, but then he can't lift it, so he's not powerful. So the problem is if you say that oh God is so omnipresent that he's also us, like then that's going to be making him compartmentalized. Like he's going to be divided into parts. So that's contradicting one of his core attributes to say that he's compartmentalized.
Because you've accepted a wrong premise in the beginning.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
You've accepted
So,
that
but
he's
I
lifting
mean,
a rock.
the omnipresence of Allah, like he's omnipresent, is more in an immaterial sense, because he's non-corporeal. So you can't say that he's actually my body. Like God is my body because he's omnipresent. Not really, because he is aware of your presence. He's present everywhere, but he's not material in that way. I don't know.
I think so. Sheikh Misbah, he brings up, this is probably one of the best ways that you can understand this. It's very hard to understand, because I mean, God exists like beyond what we can even perceive, what we can imagine, right? So, but he gives this interesting example of your thoughts, like you could think of a whole world, you could think of a whole universe in your head, right? With all these different creatures and creations and right? Yeah. Right. But all those things, you can keep thinking and thinking and thinking of various different beings, and even give them a lot of life and a lot of people write these fiction books and give like all this personality to all these characters, right? But they don't they're just figments of imagination, right?
They're actually parts of things that already were never part of you.
Yeah.
You've never made something that.
It's not actually a part of you, though. It's not a part of you, right?
It's like part of this realm. So
Yeah.
Think of a unicorn, right?
Right.
A unicorn with wings, right? Where's the wing coming from? Where's the horn coming from? Where's the horse coming from?
Right.
There's all parts of things that you were never truly created them in the making. So you never actually had
Like
true.
it's never your original thought. Like
Never.
you take from the world.
Yeah, you do take from the world. You take from your experiences, but so it's not a perfect analogy, but take it in this sense, right? In the sense that you can keep thinking of things constantly, and it doesn't subtract from you even in the least, right? It doesn't subtract from you in the least. So it's kind of like in the same sense, God can create and create and create and create, and it doesn't subtract from him in the least. Nothing, right? No, God has no deficiency from creating and creating and creating. Same way as you can keep thinking and thinking and thinking and thinking of all sorts of different thoughts, right? And it doesn't subtract from your capacity to think, your creative capacity to think of more things, right? So same type of, but God, it's like almost God's, like we are existing. So that's why it's sort of like you can think of it like we're existing in the mind of God, in that sense, in the way that, our existence really doesn't, in comparison to God, we don't really exist, You can't even compare it, right? Because if God for even a moment were not to channel existence through you, would cease to be, right? So that's the thing. Like from a Islamic philosophy standpoint, this is the way it's looked at, So, but it's a very abstract and difficult thing to grasp because we're so used to looking at the world as compartmentalized, right? But with God, everything, in fact, existence is kind of being channeled into us, right? We don't truly exist without God constantly, at every moment, channeling existence into you, right?
But then you run into the problem of how it's not part of God. It's actually, if it amounts to a thought.
I think the other.
No, because your thoughts are not actually a physical part of you, right? They're not a physical thought.
The word they would then use is emanations. It's an expression of.
Yeah, like an emanation of you, but it's not technically you, right?
Right. But it flows out from God. So is it an emanation, a reflection somehow of God?
Yes, yeah, it is.
Okay.
It's an emanation of God, but it's not God, right? So everything kind of emanates from God. All of us emanate from God, and we go back to him, right? But that doesn't make us God, right? So it's kind of like, you can think of it almost like, God's all of us, we actually used to exist in the knowledge of God, right? Before we even came to exist in this world, right? But then from the knowledge of God, we got more and more, basically, we descended, right? In the ontological ladder, right? So you can think of it like we existed in the mind of God, or the knowledge of God. Best way to say it is the knowledge. We existed in the knowledge of God, right? Because God doesn't really have a mind, right? A mind is a characteristic of a limited being, right? But we existed in the knowledge of God, and then we descended the ontological ladder until we reach this point of corporeality, right? And then we're going to go back to God, right? As the original source, right? That's why everything is perishing, and saying everything is perishing, right? Except God's face, because everything is kind of, emanating back, emanated from God, is going back, emanating back to God, right? So that's sort of like, you can think of it as two arcs, the arc of descent and then the arc of ascent, right? But that's sort of the way to look at it, I guess, in I think. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but
It makes sense. But again, these were his points. I just wasn't able to adequately.
Yeah, like a really
Yeah.
good way to answer it. Like I think his incorrect assumption is that somehow the sum of a bunch of finite things will amount to infinite, but that's wrong. Like if you sum all of humanity, all of the universe, it's still going to be finite. So like infinite is actually something that's not material. Like we can't think of anything in this universe that's infinite because we're all finite. The entire universe is finite. So all of these things are not God, because even if you sum all of them together, it's still going to be a finite sum.
And
So like you can't encompass, like God is not any of these things. That's why it's like la ilaha illallah. You have to reject everything that's finite, and then the only thing that's left is the infinite. Like, but it's something beyond the material realm. Like you can't sum material entities and make that equate to infinity.
Yeah, I guess what he's trying to say is, think about it like this: infinity plus 1 billion, 1 trillion, we'll say 1 quadrillion, whatever. Infinity plus 1 quadrillion, what does that equal? Infinity, right? 1 quadrillion doesn't add or subtract anything from infinity,
But
right?
it's also not part of it. Like what he's saying is like why is like how can God be infinite if he's not encompassed? Like if we're not also God, like that's going to be subtracting from God is what you're saying, right? Like it's not like God is not infinite if he's also not encompassing us, right?
That's my friend.
Yeah, because God is so big, he's infinite. He has to encompass everything.
How can we
Yeah.
be separate? Why are we separate?
Right. That's what it's part.
We aren't ever separate though. Every moment that we exist is because of God. So this idea of independence from God or independently existing of God is completely false, and it completely doesn't jive with Islam. Every moment we exist, there's like I think a hadith from the Prophet, Ilahi la takilni ila nafsi tarfata aynin abada, right? That oh Allah, don't entrust me to myself for even the blink of an eye, right? Because that's literally, I mean, that's true tawheed there, to understand that every moment of your existence, that every moment that our existence, every second, right, that passes fails to be like right now, every second we're sitting here, the previous second has ceased to exist, right? And every second it's like kullu man, what is it? Kulla yawmin huwa fi sha'n. There's a verse of the Quran, right? That every day God is anew, right? So it's a very beautiful way of understanding, right? But this is actually from a religious standpoint, what it means is that every moment God is channeling existence into all things that he chooses to exist in this universe, right? So we're never separate from God. We're never independent existences. Such you could ask that question that, okay, well, how are we existing if we're not part of God, right? I mean, in that sense, like we're not part of God, because we don't truly exist if God were to take away his you can say, as you said, emanation from us, even for a blink of an eye, right?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a hard concept today to conceive here.
It is. I mean, it gets into, with wahdatul wujud, these things are kind of very deep also, and I think they've been very misunderstood, But if you look into our literature, you will find a proper understanding of these concepts. Some folks, they take it a little too far, and they start saying very like,
Corporeal.
yeah, they say things that almost sound like border on kufr, But
They start bringing God down to the corporeal level.
Yeah.
It's the contingent level, it's the contingency, and existence level that we're talking about.
yeah. There's a beautiful verse in the Quran, and it reminds me of this concept. So it says, "Alam tara ila rabbika kayfa madda al-dhil." Have you not seen how God has spread the shadow, right? وَلَوْ شَاءَ لَجَعَلَهُ سَاكِنًا. If Allah willed, He would have made it still, right? ثُمَّ جَعَلْنَا الشَّمْسَ عَلَيْهِ دَلِيلًا. And then it says, ثُمَّ قَبَضْنَاهُ إِلَيْنَا قَبْضًا يَسِيرًا. Then we cause it to come back to us, slowly, right? So what is that talking about? Some people, they say, okay, this refers to like shadows, right? Like actual shadows, right? But it actually, in some of the more like esoteric commentaries of the Quran, they say what it means is like emanations, right? Like this is how God has spread the shadow. He spread, our existences are like shadows, right? They're like shadows of God's knowledge, God's infinite knowledge, that's kind of projecting into this lower corporeal realm, right? And then slowly we're going back towards God, right? We're traveling back towards our source. So that's like that قَبَضْنَاهُ إِلَيْنَا قَبْضًا, like Allah's slowly retracting you back to your original source, which is God's knowledge, right? So we're all ascending back to that. But that's what this world is. It's kind of like a lower projection, an emanation of God's knowledge, right?
It's an adequate answer.
Okay, yeah, sorry. It's a very deep answer. Maybe the answer he's giving is like easier to understand and process. Yeah.
Because I think it's a very cool discussion actually to have. I'd like to hear more of his or her thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, bring him next time. Yeah, it would be nice to have him, inshallah. Yeah. Is this the same friend you were gonna bring?
No, we all three of us know each other.
Oh, okay.
He's also heard these debates,
Oh, okay.
so being able to provide him with a good answer to them would be good.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have a lot of, mashallah, very good brothers here that can hopefully contribute,
There
inshallah.
never is a good answer, but sometimes exposure and then later on, realization will occur. Recognition or realization.
It's just hard to separate these ideas from just falling into being like the Hindu conception, where there's then divinity in everything.
Yeah.
Right? So, like it's like it's complicated to balance all those things.
So we should define terms that we should define consciousness. We should define divinity because I think sometimes we get perverse in the way we apply them.
Yeah, so you see, I think Hinduism and pantheism, these are completely antithetical to Islam. Like, this is not what we're saying. Like, what I'm saying is not at all like pantheistic. It's not like what Hinduism says. Hinduism has like a concept of this, but it's a very corrupted idea that, oh, we are actually all God. They define emanations of God as God, right? And that's a huge, huge fallacy. Emanations of God are not God, right? They're projections. They don't have any clear independent existence, right? Rather, they don't truly exist. But if you were to compare them to God, I mean, relatively amongst ourselves, we can say, okay, yeah, we all exist, right? But if you were to compare your existence to the existence of God, I mean, there's no comparison, right? Like, you don't truly exist. Everything is.
There is no comparison.
Yeah.
In the literal sense, you can't even put it in the same like.
You can't even like say that. You can't even put it in a sentence. It doesn't even make sense.
If you really think about it, it's like apples and oranges. They're not or apples and computers. It's like two different classes of things.
It's like comparing infinite to a set like one value.
Yeah.
Infinite is never ending amount of numbers, and then one value just that one small minuscule number in
Right.
that chain of forever going numbers. So can you just sum up like what you said at the end about what was it? I'm blanking out. About God being what was it? When he talked about his friend saying God wasn't everything.
Yeah, God's not infinite. He's not everything.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So can you just sum up like what you meant to like just in a simple?
Yeah. So God's not infinite if he's not everything. So this idea, right, supposes that we are things in comparison to God, right? When we're not things. We cannot, like, our existence is not even there in comparison to God, right? You cannot even put those two things in the same sentence, because God is the ultimate. He is the absolute. We are all just possibilities, right? Contingent existences, right? So, it's like kind of saying, let me say, kind of put it like this, okay? Let's say you have a light source, right? Right? You have a light source, or maybe we'll say like a generator that's always on, that never turns off, right? It's always on. And it can never ever turn off, right? It's never been off and never will be off, right? Let's imagine that that's God, right? And then you have a whole bunch of smaller generators that get their power from God, or from this major generator, right? And then they turn on, right? They have to constantly have a stream of electricity going through them to stay on, right? And then, so these smaller generators, right? Each one of them, they could be on, could be off, right? And they're getting their electricity, they're getting their power source from this one generator that's always on, right? So now, would you say that somebody comes and says, okay, well, this generator, this main generator you said that's always been on, that always has been on, always will be on, right? That's infinite, right? Um, it needs to have to, all these other, other generators, it needs to subsume those as well. Those also need to be part of it in order for it to truly be infinite, in order for it to truly exist. No, because uh, all these other generators are all contingent. They didn't even exist before. They didn't even exist before, and very soon they'll cease to
The
exist.
definition of a generator is not, you can't even call them a generator without the main generator giving them electricity and causing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So in order for them to even to exist, that in order for them to actually even work, that main generator is pumping electricity through them, right? That's kind of how you think about the concept of existence, like we're saying. So God is pumping existence through you, right? At every single second. There's never a moment that you don't have God pumping existence through you, right? So for you to say, okay, well, then we have to all be part of God. No, because you don't actually truly exist. You're just a vessel. You're literally just a vessel, right? That's what you are. And so I think, I don't know, it's very abstract. It's hard to summarize it. It's a very difficult concept to understand.
It's great.
Yeah.
Somebody commented saying that we are the possibilities of God.
We are the possibilities of God.
It's weird, but maybe.
I don't know. I don't like that phraseology that much, to be honest with you, because the reason why is because whatever God wants, إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ, right? When Allah wills something, He just says be and it is. Like God doesn't need possibilities, right? Possibilities don't really, but I think I get what this person is saying, because we're like contingent beings. We could exist, we could not exist, right? It depends, right?
They asked the question that saying a vessel does not exist, as in like they're confused.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say it's kind of like in the sense that you are like I guess like a placeholder, You can think of it like a placeholder. You need something to like fill that placeholder. Otherwise, it's kind of just like an empty shell, right? It doesn't really have any. So God putting His existence through you is what gives you any type of being, right? So that's why we're saying that it's not possible for you to say, hey, I'm independent, or God has to be me, and God has to be part of, or I have to be part of God in order for God to truly be infinite, right? Because God is actually pumping existence to you through you in every moment, right? So it's like if God didn't do that, you wouldn't even exist, right? So there's no comparison. There's no comparison there. You can't say that God is, it is finite unless He includes me, right? Because who are you? You're nothing. You're actually nothing, right? If God didn't pump the existence through you.
He said vessel, He's saying empty shell. He's saying lack of existence. You are a lack of existence. Like by definition, because you're a contingent possibility.
Yeah.
You are a lack of existence. It's not a shell, it's not a vessel, it's a lack of existence. And existence is coming into you.
Yeah.
But I guess the next question would be what's the essence of existence? Is it a part of God? Is it part of it that's leaving Him? Is it part of it that's an arm of God? I guess those are questions that some people may ask. What's this existence? Is it like a tentacles there He's got? They can answer seriously. It's electricity. Are you limiting Him by saying that?
No. I think so. It's God's qudra, right? God's power, right? God's power when He wills for something to be, right? That thing comes into existence, right? That's what the Quran tells us, right? When God, إِذَا قَضَى أَمْرًا فَإِنَّمَا يَقُولُ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ, and it is, right? He says to something be and it is, right? So does that thing now become part of God? No, but it's a manifestation, it's an emanation of His power. It's an emanation of, so we're not part of God in this sense, but we're we're an emanation of his power or his omnipotence, right? His omnipotence causes us to basically emanate from his infinite existence, right? But that doesn't make us God, right? That doesn't make us part of God. We're not part of God, right? Because it's like literally, it's kind of like, I would say, the best way to think about it, so this is how some Urafa have described it. They use this analogy of like waves in the sea, you know? So, you know, like every wave, they say every wave in the ocean is different from the next one, right? Every wave in the ocean is different from the next one, and it exists for a moment, a flicker, and it's gone, right? You see what I'm saying? So, but the core of it is water, right? The core of every wave is water, right? Now, if you were to say, okay, well, this wave, you know, if the water of the ocean doesn't include this wave, it's no longer, you know, an ocean, right? If you were to say that, wouldn't that be stupid? That doesn't make any sense, right? Because that's literally a flash and it's gone, right? It's a flash in existence and it's gone, right? So that's the way you can think about it. It's kind of used in this sense that existence is kind of being channeled through us, right? And we're like the waves on the ocean surface, right? But those waves, you know, that wave itself is not the ocean, right? It's just a quick flicker, right? And the wave as it is as a wave is not the ocean, right? Its existence is it's not completely separate because of course it's getting water that's channeled through it, like from the ocean, right? But it's also it's so minute and so like trivial that to say that limits the ocean or that's even part of the ocean.
Even by its own definition, it's not something that's independent of the ocean. It's actually a description of something that's happening on the ocean.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's an abstract description. Like a wave on the ocean, it is not like it's not something that's material. You can actually truly think about the definition of a wave.
Yeah.
So I think we'll wrap this up after these two questions that the same person put out. They said that when you say, are you talking about the vessel or the thing in the vessel? And then is the vessel non-existent or the being inside it?
Yeah, so the basically the vessel itself does not really exist, right? It doesn't exist. It's kind of like that's why it's hard to explain because it's a very abstract concept. When I say like empty shell, I mean like I think the better way to put it is like an ocean wave, right? Let's say, you know, when ocean comes up with a wave, the water like splatters in different directions, right? If you were to pause that moment in time, right? The water, you know, floating in different directions, right? Being particularized in different ways. Every wave is slightly different than the next one. Would you say that, let's say if you were to take out the water, if you were to you have a wave, you take out the water, is there still a shell there? Is there anything there? No, right? It's just a particularization of existence and a certain conformation, right? That's what we are. We're just particularizations of God's existence in a certain conformation, right?
So we are the performances of God, merely the actions.
Yeah, we're like the emanations of God's actions. Yeah, that's the right way to think about it.
One time I was talking to Chad a while ago. I can't find this definition, but he said the definition of abd in old Arabic, and I'm not sure. I still can't find this. If you can find it, it'd be nice. If he can find it, I'll talk to him one day. Abd is actually what Arabs used to refer to as the footprint of a camel. Like the footprint of a camel is the abd. So basically, you know, Allah calls you ibad or abd. You are basically the footprint of the camel. You know, and I think that may be where emanations are coming from, where these concepts that we're talking about. It's not the footprint is not, you know, it's not the camel, right?
Right.
And it's not connected to the camel at all, right? And it's just the effect basically, or it's a reflection of what the camel is.
Yeah. It's kind of, you know, another Sufi analogy is the sun. you know, the rays of the sun. Like if you say Allah is nur samawati wal ard, like the Quran says, right? Allah is like the light of the heavens and the earth, right? You have these emanations, right? Rays that come out from the sun. And they basically, you know, as they come down, they can get particularized in different ways, right? That light can be refracted and it can, you know, burn things. It can, you know, it reflects off certain things. You know, it has different basically patterns that it can form on different objects, right? But it's all coming from one source, right? The sun. But they're emanations. They're emanations coming from that source, right? And they take particularizations, they take forms, right? So that's kind of the way to think about it. But I mean, let me ask you this though. Yeah, but is a ray, if you have a ray of the sun, right? That ray itself, right? If you were to compare its existence to the sun, is it anything? It's nothing, right? It's nothing. You can't even compare it, right? So that's what we're saying. Like the emanation, and it's such a transient thing. It's 1 second there, 1 second gone. It's a flicker, right? And it's all coming from that source, right?
It's contingent as well.
It's contingent, yeah. I mean, so it's that's why people use these types of analogies, right? To understand kind of this sort of situation. It's very hard to explain, but that's why this whole idea of saying, okay, well, God has to subsume me in order to truly be God. In a sense, what they're saying is sort of presupposing. You can actually read this. This is actually one of Imam Rida's debates with like a theologian, and this theologian asked him. It's in English, but if you like that, you can summarize that for them, because he asked him directly like this question 11.
You should send the
If you don't mind,
Okay, he says, will you not tell me, Master, is he in the creatures or are the creatures in him? So he said, he is above all that, Umran. He is not in the creatures, nor are the creatures in him. He is exalted above that. I will teach you what you do not know, and there is no strength except in Allah. Tell me about the mirror. Are you in it, or is it in you? If neither one of you is in the other, then how did you come to see your own reflection in it? The Imam, peace be upon him, made it impossible for Allah the Exalted to exist in his creatures, or they exist in him. He gave an example of that through the reflection in the mirror. It is not in the mirror, nor is the mirror in it. Rather, it is light, which brings about seeing the reflection in the mirror, and it is not in any way in it. So, I don't know if that... it's very interesting. Yeah, you can send this in the group. That's good.
Ponder upon it until next week, inshallah.
Yeah, inshallah, inshallah.
Brother or sister have further questions, or if they want to join us next week, it would be nice.
What's the name? Just one more question.
Yes.
Saying basically, we could manifest as anything as the mercy of God.
We can manifest as anything?
That's the question. Basically, we could manifest as anything at the mercy of God's will.
Yes, I mean God can do whatever He wills, right? So if God chose to manifest you in a certain form, you know, all of a sudden, right? He could, yeah, certainly.
What was the how you said gist of what you just read about Imam Ghazali?
Oh, it's basically that, you know, basically when you look in a mirror, right? When you see someone in a mirror, the Imam gave this analogy of looking at yourself in the mirror, right? So somebody can say, okay, well, do you truly exist in the mirror, right? Or does the mirror exist in you, right? So like when you're looking at the mirror, right? Is that mirror existing inside you because you see it, right? So does that mirror exist inside you, or do you exist in the mirror?
So I exist.
Yeah.
It's neither, yeah.
It's neither, right? So it's a perfect analogy to what we're saying, that God doesn't truly exist inside you, right? But you're just a reflection. You're a reflection of the perfections of God, right? You're a reflection of God's emanations, basically, right? But you don't truly exist in the mirror, nor does the mirror exist in you, right? So these are all analogies and symbols that you can try to use to understand it, but it's a very abstract thing. Yeah.
We can have this.
Inshallah. Yeah. Good questions, guys. I mean, it's a pretty deep discussion that we got into at the end there.
Actually, probably we had 3 or 4 people asking questions from online, but
How many people are watching?
3 or 4.
yeah.
Wow, mashallah. That's great. Yeah.
It is.
It is, yeah.
Especially if they're
Alhamdulillah.
engaged. That's all you want to ask.
Yeah. Inshallah. Of course, inshallah. All right, guys. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
He was supposed to come tonight.
No, I'm saying whoever they don't have to come for these sessions, you know. Like, inshallah.
Inshallah, next Friday. Not the one who posed those questions, but
It's okay.
we mutually know each other. He's involved with those questions.
Whoever wants to, because I want them to